kind comments earlier. Yes, I find that, and not just me, but any person who stands up and actually tries to do something in any elected body, from city council all the way to the United States Congress, is going to receive a lot of criticism, because there's the way it is for a reason. There's a lot of forces in no matter what issue we're talking about, there's a lot of forces that want to keep things the way they are, so anyone who wants to change them is obviously going to feel some sort of heat from somebody. But I can tell you, despite, and I don't follow rumors and what people say about me or anybody else, I really completely ignore it, but it's like when I mentioned to people, or when I made my announcement that a little over a year ago that I wasn't going to serve in office anymore, and I told people I really do want to go home and just be with my kids and spend more time with my family. Hopefully a year or so later, all the rumors and suggestions of why he would leave the legislature have hopefully dissipated somewhat, because I absolutely love every moment that I now have at home that I previously didn't have. And one of the things that, as I woke up this morning, was coming to the Madison Forum, and I remember speaking here in the past, I don't ever shave on Saturdays anymore, which may seem like a small deal, but when you have to do it every single year for like over a decade, because you know you got to go out in public, it's nice not to have to anymore. So I don't do it anymore. So that's why I didn't shave this morning. So, and I hope that's not offensive to this august body.
He didn't shave either.
He didn't shave either. But I want to thank Michael, who I consider not only a friend, but a community activist in the right way. And that is we have community activists, and I certainly not trying to put you in the same boat with other famous community activists, but we have community activists who simply want to go out and say, this is the way we think things are, and I really don't want to hear what the other side has to say. Michael has provided through this forum, and that's why a lot of elected officials don't want to show up, an opportunity for everyone to come together and say whatever you want and cross-examine the people who are standing before you as an alleged authority. So as I speak today, I certainly can't stand here and tell you that I know everything that I'm discussing about, that there's no other opinion that matters, because there clearly is. So hopefully we can have an open dialogue. But I want to get into this, and unlike days in the past, you caught me at the exact perfect time. My daughter's basketball season ended last night, sadly, in the playoffs. And we don't have another basketball game for like 2 weeks, like the whole year. So this is the perfect time I can stay and answer as many questions as you like. I had one of those mornings this morning. You ever had one of those mornings where like everything is going wrong? So I woke up, the internet didn't work, which, 20 years ago that didn't matter. Now it's like lifeblood, right? I didn't get home till like midnight last night, so I woke up early to start preparing, and I woke up and the internet doesn't work. Then my printer doesn't work, right? And then the computer that I used to have, an older computer, laptop that I had all my Article 5 stuff on, it doesn't work. I'm like, this is impossible, and the whole house is sleeping, so I don't want to wake anybody up. So I finally get some things together. I got my phone to work so I could look at the internet just for a minute. And I go outside to get my car, I open the garage door, and the dog takes off. So now he's across the street, and I'm screaming at him, and he's not paying attention to me at all. So I had to go get the enforcer in the house, which is my wife. And I had to wake her up, which was not really what she wanted. If you could have seen the look. So on the way home, I'm gonna have to buy something, I'm not sure what, to let her know that I'm really sorry for waking her up so early in the morning. But anyway, I made it here. All right, so I want to talk about two things today real quickly. I want to talk about a balanced budget amendment as it pertains to where we are and how an Article 5 Convention of the States may play into that. So I have this lovely thing here that looks, this is not a global warming diagram. Well, I say that not in a pejorative term, but it's the hockey stick that they often talk about, right? This is the U.S. debt hockey stick, okay? So you can see from back here in 1940 up until about 1980, 85, it was going okay, and now it has spiked. And that, by the way, just so you know, this is old, that's really old, that's 2005. If we'd had 2013, I don't think the screen could have held it, right? So, this is what I call a cliff, all right? And to put that in a further context, so if you look at the percentage of debt to GDP, which I think is extremely important, because if I'm a kid like when I was 18 years old and I borrowed money, like $2,000 to buy a car, you know, so I'm making, how much was I making when I was 18 years old? Maybe $15,000, and I borrowed $2,000 to a car. My debt to personal GDP ratio is not that bad, right? So when we take a look at debt around the world with individual countries, we've got to see what is their ability to pay that debt, because that makes a difference. Well, if you look at the US debt, total debt to GDP for the US, it's over 110%. Out of the 193 countries around the world, there are only 10 that have a higher debt to GDP ratio. Only 10. And these are not what I would put at the top of my list of the most financially stable countries in the world that we ought to be patterning ourselves after. To give you an idea of the top few: Greece, Jamaica, Italy, and Portugal. Okay? Two of those four, Jamaica's not in the European Union, but two of the four recently had to have bailouts. Okay? So, if you look at this, you look at our debt to our ability to pay that debt, and then you look at where we're going. The CBO says that by 2024, which, as you know, is in less than 10 years, amazingly, our national debt will be $27.2 trillion. Okay, so this is going, this cliff is getting steeper. So what do we do about that? Well, remember what happens when we have this type of debt. Just so you know, because I think some people look at this debt, I know for a fact people look at this debt and it becomes such a large number, so many zeros, and our education system hasn't done a good job of teaching people what debt means, that it just their eyes gloss over, and they just say, you know, what's another zero? Just add another zero, who cares, right? It has gotten so bad that people really don't care, and they don't understand how it impacts their life. Remember, when the United States government prints money, what really is that, right? By definition, it's inflation, inflating the money supply, right? When the United States government prints money, but every time they print money, what is it really? It's a tax. It's a tax on the dollars that you have in your pocket, because they've just taken the dollar you have in your pocket and made it worth less, right? So whether they take a dollar out of your pocket or whether they take the dollars in your pocket and make them less, it doesn't really matter. It's a tax. So when we, in this group, justifiably so, and as just general taxpayers, get upset that the state of Georgia and different regions want to pass a multi-billion-dollar SPLOST, or Cobb County decides they want to raise property taxes, or as I just had a property in Bartow County that I own, the tax went up triple. And I called over there and I said, what the heck happened? And they said, oh yeah, well they raised the property tax by 25%, and of course the assessment added to tripling. I'm like, did anybody complain? They're like, no. I'm like, what is going on? But anyway, so we have these tax increases that some of us, at least in this group, justifiably get upset about. But what we don't seem to get upset about is when the government devalues the money we have in our pocket by doing this exact same thing, by running up these massive, incredible debts. So, to use my analogy of going off a cliff, if you are in a vehicle and you're driving off this cliff, you really have two things you can do. I mean, I guess you could put your car in reverse and drop your transmission, but let's set that aside for a moment. There's two brakes in most vehicles, right? There's the foot brake and there's the emergency brake. I would argue that the foot brake is Congress. We've been trying to put our foot on this brake forever. I would argue that the emergency brake is what I want to talk about today, Article 5. Foot brake we've tried, guess what, we're pumping it, it's not working. If we're going off the cliff, maybe we ought to try the emergency brake. Now, there are 4 ways that the Constitution allows us to make amendments. And I love the Constitution. I think the Constitution and the Declaration are the 2 most important secular documents that have ever been written and have had a greater impact on this world than any 2 other secular documents. Sometimes I don't want to say get frustrated, sometimes I get puzzled by those who would say, well, I like these parts of the Constitution, but I really don't think that the founders knew what they were talking about when they wrote this. I think they knew what they were talking about when they wrote the whole thing. I think these were men that not only were geniuses, but were divinely inspired, which means it goes beyond any realm of understanding that we have in this room. So when they put this together, they really created 4 ways. Now I want to quickly mention that, oops, things here scrolling in. I want to mention the arguments that were going on at the time of the Constitutional Convention. Now, as you know, in the Constitutional Convention, this was a very heated debate. There are, if we went back and looked at the records, it wasn't like they were just sitting around and everyone was saying, yes, unanimous consent on everything. I mean, these guys were fighting as well they should have to come to the right conclusion. So one of the first proposals put forth by these geniuses that gathered was to say that anytime we were going to amend the Constitution, it had to be done by a convention of the states. There was no other alternative. That was the only way that you could ratify it, or the only way you could change the Constitution. Hamilton got up and said, no, Congress is going to be working on these things. Let's give Congress the power to be the only ones that can change the Constitution. George Mason, who I think was one of our greatest founders, said, no, let's not do that. Congress has the authority, but let's also make sure that the states have the authority through this process of calling a state convention for, a convention of the states, I should say, for amending the Constitution. By the way, when he proposed that, it was adopted unanimously. Unanimously. So it was absolutely clear from our founders that this was, and is today, a proper way to address the Constitution that we have if a problem exists. Now I'm specifically talking about this problem right here. By the way, this next little slide that you see here, you remember the hockey thing? The hockey one that I just showed you actually is right through here. That is projected where we're going. Okay? So if you thought the hockey one was bad, that's where we're headed. So my argument is that Congress is not going to solve this. I mean, we can think we're going to go, and I'm with Robert and everybody else who says we win these elections at the local level to put people in office that do the right thing, and it begins to put pressure at the national level. That being said, I do not foresee a scenario in which a United States public who's not taught to understand economics, not taught to understand debt, is going to someday wake up and say, we need to get rid of all these people that are racking up all these debt and put people in place that aren't going to do it. I just don't see that happening, right? So there has to be another alternative for it. So there's 4 things you can do. You can have a proposal by a convention of the states that's then ratified by state conventions. You can have a proposal by convention of the states that's ratified by state legislatures. You can have a proposal by Congress that's ratified by state conventions, which by the way has happened once. And you can have a proposal by Congress that's ratified by state legislatures. That is what I'm talking about here with this. So, how often, so there's really, again, going back, there's 2 bodies that can propose a constitution to the amendment, or an amendment to the Constitution. There is Congress, and there is the people. Clearly, Article 5 says that. I mean, whether you like it or not, disagree with it or not, there's no doubt, I think everyone agrees, it says that is a process. Well, Congress does this all the time. In fact, if you go back and look at the number of constitutional amendments that have been proposed, I'm going to just pick a year. In the 104th Congress, which was 1995-1996, there were 158 proposed constitutional amendments. In the 101st Congress, going back to 1989-1990, there were 214 proposed amendments to the United States Constitution. So all the time, these guys are proposing amendments to the Constitution. Wisely, our founders put in place a process that says, guys, you can do this, but it is very, very, very difficult to have happen. So unlike the healthcare law that we're dealing with, which is the only major law in the history of this country that passed without the other party voting for it at all, right? The founders said, look, if you're going to do this, you're going to have, it's going to have to be something that almost everyone agrees on. And so they set forth this process by making sure that you couldn't just willy-nilly pass a constitutional amendment. So the hundreds and hundreds that are introduced every single time, none of them, very rarely do we ever pass anything. We only had 27, right? And 10 of them passed at once, right? Yeah. So it is a process that, rightfully so, is extremely difficult to pass. And what's interesting is you look at some of the ones that have been proposed that never passed, The slavery amendment never passed, proposed in 1861. The child labor amendment never passed, that proposed in 1926. So even things that most people I think would agree on actually never ultimately end up passing. So we have this problem that I think we all know is, from an economic standpoint, I think there's moral problems, I think there's education problems that are of equal or greater value. But from an economic standpoint, is absolutely destroying this country as we sit here. We have two options for fixing it: Congress or ourselves. And again, it is undeniable that the framers of our Constitution gave us both options. Now, if we go down this pathway of fixing it ourselves, and I know many of you know, like Mark Levin, and he's recently written a lot about this and talked a lot about this, and he has a number of constitutional amendments he wants to pass, term limits, all sorts of things. There are a lot that I don't agree with. I happen to agree with this. I think a lot of these probably should be solved in other manners. But in this particular one, if we go down this path, even if we get the delegates to this convention to agree to amend it to balance the budget, it still has to pass 3/4 of the states. Now, the beauty of that is that of all the issues we talk about, it may be the only one that could pass 3/4 of the states. Why is that? Because 49 of the 50 states have this exact measure, a balanced budget amendment, in their state law or state constitution. So the states already live by this. The states already do this. Now, do they find tricky ways to get around this? Sure. Could Congress find tricky ways to get around this? Sure. Right now, there is like, you remember back in the, how many people in here are NASCAR fans? Right? So you're NASCAR fans, you remember back in the old days, they got really scared about Talladega because, man, those guys at Talladega, they're getting up to 200 miles an hour. And NASCAR said, we got to do something about it. So they put governors on the cars to slow them down, which is also the root word of government. So do I think that if we pass a constitutional amendment to balance the budget in the United States that we're absolutely going to 100% solve this problem? Probably not, because these geniuses will figure a way out like they do in California, like writing IOUs and things. But do I think it will slow them down? Do I think it will cause pause? Do I think it will begin to help solve the problem? Absolutely. So that's why I think it's so critical, because I feel we ought to all feel shame that we are leaving our children and grandchildren with this. We couldn't control ourselves. I want to say we, not me here in this room, but all of us, we here in this room, but all of us in this country, couldn't control ourselves on spending. We have found more ways to spend money on stupid things than anyone could have ever, in their wildest imagination, dreamed up. And so now we've left it with them. And I know people think you can just wash your hands of it and say, oh, that's just funny money. It's not. It's real. And somebody's got to pay the piper. And whether they're paying off that debt or the money in their pocket's worth less, they're paying the piper. And we're wrong to do this to our children. So I suggest that we embrace what the founders gave us and that we pass an amendment to balance the budget so that we solve the most looming, damaging, catastrophic fiscal condition that our nation has ever faced. So with that, I'll shut up and take my bullets, answer any questions.